like the League of Nations without America's participation. The harshness of the terms of the treaty imposed on Germany did, in fact, have the result feared by some, a negative backlash.
Fascism is made popular by the enormous dissatisfaction that comes with the results of the Treaty of Versailles.
A number of extremist political parties sprung up. One of them, the German Workers' Party, emerged in 1921 with Adolf Hitler as its leader. The aftermath of World War I eventually led to World War II in Europe. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act of 1919. The prohibition of the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages became one of the most unsettling issues of the 1920s. The 18th Amendment, ratified in 1919, which outlawed alcoholic beverages, and the Volstead Act, passed the same year to enforce the law, were largely the work of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Some of the activists were passionate about their cause, like Carrie Nation, the hatchet-wielding housewife who would invade saloons and smash all their bottles. She was arrested some 30 times for this activity between 1900 and 1910. Law enforcement agencies tried very hard to enforce the ban on alcohol, but most citizens, especially in the big cities, didn't take the law seriously. Speakeasies, illegal saloons, sprang up all across the country. Some people made their own liquor. Some smuggled it in from Canada, Mexico, or the West Indies. Prohibition was good for organized crime. Criminals like Al Capone of Chicago made fortunes on bootleg whiskey and other spirits.
The 1920s, is an era where the crime rate spikes tremendously, and a lot of it can be attributed to Prohibition.
It was this that led to the repeal of the 18th Amendment. Prohibition had led to a widespread breakdown of law and order. It proved to be unenforceable. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, repealing the 18th Amendment. The experiment in Prohibition had ended. The 19th Amendment, 1920. After decades of failure, women finally got the right to vote nationwide in 1920 with the ratification of the 19th Amendment.
The women who were the leaders of the women's suffrage movement certainly appealed to the techniques of persuasion. They certainly used the techniques of persuasion, but occasionally they would go beyond that. Susan B. Anthony, for example, had herself arrested by attempting to cast a vote even before women were given the right to vote. So they practiced a kind of civil disobedience.
Prior to 1920, women did have the right to vote in some states.
Take, for example, the state of New Jersey. Women in New Jersey were voters in the early days, in the colonial period, and in the early days of the Republic. But then that right was taken away by law in the early 19th century, and it wasn't restored until the women's suffrage movement emerged in the later part of the, in the middle, really, of the 19th century.
Wyoming was the first to give women the right to vote in state elections in 1890. Other states, mostly in the West, followed suit in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Many other states, mostly in the central part of the country, had partial women's suffrage prior to the passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment. But 9 states along the eastern seaboard and in the South held out. They did not grant women the right to vote until the 19th Amendment had passed, and some of them refused to ratify the amendment.
Many states gave partial, like presidential suffrage, so women could vote in presidential elections, but not all elections. And it seemed to be, again, the claim by some southern states that, we get to set the voting laws. These are up to us. There's our states. We can determine who gets to vote within our state boundaries.
to try to gain for women across the country, and not just in local jurisdictions or in particular states, but across the country, a right to vote. And the tactical decision was made to pursue this agenda, not simply on a state-by-state basis, but by way of a federal constitutional amendment.
During World War I, many women took jobs normally reserved for men. The men were at war. The women filled their positions at home.
The war did create an employment opportunity for women, and women did even work in the military, taking desk jobs and jobs which freed up men to fight on the front lines. And for that, President Wilson and others supported women to have the right to vote for their service to the country.
The Roaring Twenties, as the decade came to be known, began on a happy note for women, finally having received equal rights as voting citizens of the United States.
After the extension of a constitutional right to vote to women, we in the United States had accomplished universal adult suffrage. And for many years, all adults in the United States, and an adult was considered anybody over 21 years of age, had the right to vote unless they had forfeited the right to vote by, for example, committing a criminal felony, which in some jurisdictions would result in your loss of the right to vote. But so long as you were on the straight and narrow and in good standing with the law, if you were 21 years old or older, it didn't matter whether you were black or white or yellow or red, and it didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman. However, in the 1960s, pressure began to mount to change the age, to lower the age at which one was considered an adult and therefore capable of fulfilling the obligations of voting. And a movement arose to amend the Constitution yet again to move the age of voting from 21 down to 18.
Carrie Chapman Catt, who founded the League of Women Voters, had this to say about women's suffrage.
The greatest thing that came out of the war was the emancipation of women, for which no man fought.
In other programs in this series, we'll review the treaties, laws, landmark court decisions, and similar milestones that have shaped America's destiny. Documents of Destiny.